second? Anybody? Second? All right, moved and seconded. Jen, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Abarca?
Yes.
Ms. Beckner? She's not here right now. Ms. Cortez?
Yes.
Ms. Ford?
Yes.
Dr. Jones?
Yes.
Ms. Wolfson?
Yes.
Mr. Hogan?
Yes. Oh, we got a little feedback. Thank you. All right, apologies to the community. We're running a little bit late this evening, but appreciate your patience. And we're going to open up the floor to those individuals who'd like to make comment regarding our property tax rate. At this time, you'll have 3 minutes per speaker. No one has signed up? You do have a presentation. That makes sense, actually. Let's back up and have you do that. Ms. Quinley, thank you.
Good evening, Board Chair, Dr. Bedell, Board, and our community listening in this evening. We are here for our annual property tax rate hearing, which, let me move this slide. We did test this and it worked a minute ago. There we go. Now I have it. So just as a reminder of why we're here, Missouri statute requires that each school board adopt a tax levy annually, and for us that's prior to September 1st. Prior to October 1st. Many districts have to do it prior to September 1st. Statute says we will hold at least one public hearing, advertise and post that appropriately, which all has been done, and here we are tonight for that hearing now. An important component of the statute in Missouri around setting the tax rate is that bottom bullet you see there. A tax rate shall be calculated to produce substantially the same revenue as budgeted and as collected in the prior year. And so that's one of the limitations around revenues and tax rates. The levy is set by fund, which there are 4 funds in the state of Missouri. I'm going to go without those glasses. We'll hope that works. Fund 1 and 2 are what I really refer to as the operating funds, although Fund 4 is technically operating. But once money gets into Fund 4, you can't move it out for other purposes. So 1 and 2 are where our property taxes go, and that's what we live off of through the year. It's how we pay our salaries, cover our expenses. And then the 4th fund is debt services. That is a special and separate calculation that we'll talk about briefly in just a moment. The items necessary in order to compute a tax rate, the final assessed valuation. Now, one of the things that is most interesting about how this works in the state of Missouri is a school board is obligated, as you well know, prior to June 30th to adopt a budget. The largest single line item, as Mr. Barker reminds us every month during our treasurer's report, is our local property tax revenue. We get our final assessed valuation information in July after that budget has been adopted. So you use your best estimation when putting the budget together based on what you have. Commonly in the state of Missouri, the Hancock Amendment restrictions and provisions are critical pieces of this calculation. But because of Article 10, Section 11G in the Missouri Constitution that you see below, KCPS is not subject to Hancock currently. Proposition C revenues are critical normally, only when subject to Hancock. So again, something that we don't have to gather. Article 10 is a 1995 court order established just for Kansas City Public Schools in the state of Missouri that sets our rate at an amount up to $4.95.99 per $100 of assessed valuation. It's been in place since 1995 via that court order. This is in lieu of a voter-authorized tax ceiling, which is what most school districts will work under. And then the final is, if you have a debt service levy, then the information about principal and interest necessary to meet that, which again, Kansas City Public Schools does not have because it was 1967 when we last passed a GO bond and that debt has been long paid off. So assessed valuation and that important component of our tax levy. What you see here In the first red box, final 2020, so $3.7 billion was our final assessed valuation a year ago at this time when we stood before you. This year, our final assessed valuation is just over $4 billion, an increase of $271 million, or 7%. Now, what's really important around that is some of this is new construction. So 120 million of that 270 million is new construction. The way the law works, when you calculate your tax rate, in the first year of new construction, you get to keep the revenue on all of that, so you exclude it from the calculation. In the years that follow, it's all about how much more or less assessed valuation there is on property that was in place a year ago. So the net change on our existing property from last year is $151 million. And then you can see here that equals just over 4%. As a reminder, we did budget for 3.25%, so it's slightly above the increase that we budgeted for in the spring. So appropriately, it's come in slightly over instead of slightly under, which is where you want to be. So those important components then to the actual calculation. New construction, as I mentioned, you get to keep all the revenue, so you look at that separately. Reassessment occurs every other year. This is a reassessment year, so you would expect to see a slightly higher percentage. This is sort of good news. Our tax increment financing, or TIF properties within our boundaries, has decreased. It's only $282 million, which is a $13 million decrease from last year. And the lost revenue is only $14 million, which is a decrease of about $600,000 from last year. This is actually about the third year in a row that we've seen decreases here, which is a positive for us, although that amount is still obviously incredibly high. Under the Hancock Amendment, you're allowed growth in revenue. Now, I'll remind you, I'm going to talk to you about the Hancock Amendment, but it doesn't apply to us because of Article 10. It's just important to understand the components normally, I think. Under the Hancock Amendment, any taxing jurisdiction is allowed the growth in revenues for the value of that property that was in place a year ago at the lesser of these 3 points. The actual increase in assessed valuation, which for us is that 4% that we just looked at, consumer price index of 1.4, or a statutory maximum of 5%. That's that tool that gives property owners protection from dramatic increases and taxing jurisdiction protections from dramatic decreases. And so were we under Hancock, the limit this year would be 1.4%. However, our increase allowable is the 4%, which says right there. Okay, so a lot of numbers on this slide, so I'll take you to just a couple of important ones. The third column is the reassessment, the final reassessment. And you see that it totals that $4 billion down there in that second white line that says total assessed valuation, the $271 million increase. I think what's most important in the far right column when you look at the increase for residential properties is 12% on average, not each property of course, but 12% on average. Ag is really not a player with us because of the low value, but commercial properties, the average increase is 2.77%. So this 4% that we're talking about is largely sitting on homeowners. Now, what this means for us, because we're at the 4% instead of the 3.25, that assuming we collect our property taxes at last year's collection rate, which came in slightly lower than we thought, at just around 90%, and we collect the outstanding appeals from 2019 and 20 that are sitting at the state right now, we would have about $5 million more than budgeted. So a couple of important components there. I've asked for a report from the state appeals. Many of the appeals were heard this July and August, so I'm waiting for that report. I think we've gotten a little bit of that money filtered in with regular payments, so we need to separate that out. But as of today, when you go to the state website, the only appeal remaining to be heard is that of the Country Club Plaza, which is by and large the largest amount of our monies that have been sitting up there. So there's still about $5 million in appealed taxes sitting with the State Tax Commission today. Proposition C, again, the rollback provision doesn't apply to us, but were we under Hancock, it would. And what this is from 1982, a 1-cent sales tax went into place in the state of Missouri for all schools. We each get an equal amount of that per child each year, per WADA, weighted average daily attendance. If we are under Hancock, then we give back half of that to the voters by a reduction in their property tax rate. So we figure out how many dollars we got, take that by half, and how many cents would you need to reduce the tax rate, and we'll look at that. We do not have a partial or full waiver of that, so if we were under Hancock, this would actually apply to us. There are only about 40 districts left in the state of Missouri of the 518 who still have this kind of a rollback on the books. The only way to get it off the books is a voter referendum to do so. So this is a quick look at what that would mean, and the meat of the matter is down in the red numbers, the rollback rate. So were we under Hancock doing that part of the calculation, we would roll our rate back by 27 cents. That would be 7 cents or 0.07 cents less than the previous year, which tells you that we had a lesser amount of collections last year in those property tax revenues, or those sales tax revenues, I'm sorry. So very important slide. What does this increase mean to our homeowner? So if you have a $100,000 home, when we use that because it's easy to multiply upward or downward, depending upon the market value of your home, but were you to have a $100,000 home when this tax rate goes into effect, that would be a $115 increase on the tax bill that will be coming out very soon from the county after our rate is set. This takes a peek at our operating revenues. And again, you see there in the middle column that we collected at about 90%. We did budget for 92 this year, so we do expect that to probably be a little less, but it just shows you the change compared to the prior year of roughly $16 million, although we budgeted for about $9 million in increase. This is a quick comparison of levies within our surrounding area. So this is the operating levy. Just a reminder, KCPS has only an operating levy. And so you can look for us on there and you find that we're third down at that 4.9599, the rate that has been in place that administration will recommend to you tonight continue, with Raytown and Center having higher operating levies. But I think what's really important on that slide is how close those next few are. So we're at the high end of the average for the operating levy, but very much in line with what's happening in our surrounding districts. This slide now looks at the total levy the districts will be assessing around us, and you find where we go in this is to the bottom. And that is because these districts are also looking at the calculation of their debt service levy to support existing GO bond debt, and since we don't have that, our total levy is considerably less than everyone else around us. So that brings us to really our recommendation, which is a continuation of the existing levy at $4.95.99 per $100 of assessed valuation.
All right, thank you, Ms. Quinley. And now we'll actually open it up to the floor for those individuals who'd like to make comment on the property tax rate. We had none sign up, is that correct? Ms. Kolkmeyer, okay, thank you. And none online sending messages through either. So with that, I believe we can adjourn our property tax